What's going on, Super Creators? Super Manny here, and this is the first episode of this new series where I'll be answering questions that you guys have so that you can learn for you. So, the first question actually comes from my good friend Ted Huff, and he asked down here or over here, what is the best way to speed up the editing workflow when it comes to podcasts? And for that, I have 5 tips for you guys. So tip number 1 is that you should record to edit or record to cut. So I don't know if that's the correct term, but basically what that means is only record what you're going to use. So for example, in most of my podcasts, what I do is I'll begin the podcast. I'll sign in to Zoom or whatever web app I'm using. I'll begin talking to the guests. I'll warm them up. I'll thank them for, joining, and then I'll let them know, okay, you're ready to go. I'm going to start recording. That way they're ready, and that's the point where I'm going to start the podcast. And I'll record, and I'll introduce, and then get it going. And then also at the end, I will make sure to finish it with whatever finishing statement that I have, and then I'll stop the recording, take a deep breath, and then just continue talking casually, thanking them again for being on the show, etc. What this does is it helps me not have to edit anything in between, because I know that everything that's in between or what was recorded is what I want. So all I have to do is just take that clip, plug it in, and I can post it and I can upload it, and the audio is perfect how I like it. So that's tip number 1, is make sure that you only record what you need and make sure that you get it in basically one take. Just make sure you get it in one take. Tip number 2 is to please have your questions ready. So you have to know who you're interviewing, why you're interviewing them, and what kind of questions you want to ask them. I mean, this just shows professionalism. It shows that you're ready, and it basically shows that you want to produce content that is valuable for the listeners. If you just have a guest on the show and you just start making it up as you go along, it usually doesn't go well because you're not prepared, right? So even though some things might go off the page, but at least have something ready. Have certain questions that you definitely want to ask them. Have good questions that'll throw them off that other people haven't asked. And also have questions that will bring value and you can use as snippets for later on, as a 1-minute snippet, 30-second snippet, so that you can use to also promote your page. So just be ready with your questions beforehand. Study your subject the person that you're going to interview, and make sure that you're just ready for the interview. That's the main thing to have an awesome podcast. And that way you don't mess it up. Because if your questions are ready, you don't have to cut anything out, and everything is clean, everything's clear, and you can just post it. So that's how it helps you speed up the workflow. Okay, tip number 3 is to have a set intro and a set outro. There's 2 ways that you can do this. The one way that I do it is what I say at the beginning will always be the same, and it'll be, thank you so much for coming on to the Super Creators Podcast. I'm your host, Super Manny, and today we have a great guest. That's always my intro, right? I just say that. And then I have a certain outro. And then my outro, and this is how I know to cut the recording from tip number 1. How to cut it is because when I finish, I say, right, thank you for listening to the Super Creators Podcast. Again, I'm your host, Super Manny, and remember, each and every one of you are super creators. You just have to find your superpower, and I'll catch you on the next show or whatever. And then I cut the recording, right? So those are my intros, those are my outros that I continually use. And then I say it live just so it can have a little bit of difference every time. But what you can do is you can pre-record these things. So even when you introduce your guest, you can just pre-record it, and then that way it's already done. So you can have the same recording every single time and then attach it to your interview. Most interviewers do this, and you can't even tell because it's so smooth and it's so fluid. Same thing with the outro. Once the interview finishes, you can have a certain outro thanking them for listening, sending them a link to a different page where they can check more out, where they can check the video interview, etc., etc., etc. So record these things pre-hand. That way you don't have to say it live and you already have it ready to stitch together. Okay, and that goes to tip number 4. And tip number 4 is to use templates. Now, what I mean by use templates, it doesn't mean that you have to find templates somewhere else. It means to use the same format of editing every single time. This makes it a lot easier because once you edit one episode, the second episode is just a copy. Literally, the second episode, you would just have to change whatever the interview was. The intro should be the same, outro should be the same, everything else, you just have to change the middle part. And what this does is, what it helps is that you already did the work once that you keep repeating. If you change the format every single time, then that means you have to re-edit every single part, meaning re-edit the intro, re-edit the middle part, re-edit the outro, and everything else. Also, with templates comes for your thumbnails that you're going to use to promote the podcast. As you see, like the way I do it, I have 3 types of thumbnails. One thumbnail I use for my stories, another one I use for the Instagram page itself to post, and then the third one is the YouTube thumbnail. Now these are 3 different sizes, but what I do is I create the same one image from the YouTube thumbnail, and then I just take that same part, copy and paste it onto different sizes, and just resize it. So I have the same lettering, I have the same colors, I have the same background, I have the same images, I'm just resizing it to different sizes. Now I made this just once, and every time I have a new guest, I just add their photo, and maybe if the background has to be changed a little bit, I will do that. Or their name, right? That's about it, change the letters. But I have that already saved as a PSD file, which is a Photoshop file, and I just open it and change whatever I need, and I'll save it under that other person's name. So that way I don't have to start from scratch, start from zero. That's what I mean by using a template. And tip number 5, which is the biggest tip, is to use Anchor to upload your podcast. Now, as you know, nowadays you can upload your podcast to Apple, Spotify, Stitcher, SoundCloud, all these different places, and that's a lot for one person to do that you don't have a team or a production company and all that. So what you can do is, by using Anchor, is you just upload it once to Anchor, and they will do the back end work of uploading it onto all your favorite places. So what's good about this is that you have a place where you can gather data, analytics, know your viewers, all of that stuff, and you only have to upload it once. The only downside with that is that make sure that you have everything correct when you upload it, meaning your titling, your captions, right, or whatever content that you write out about the podcast, and make sure that all that is correct, and then you can upload it and it'll be posted everywhere. Then the only other thing you have to do is just upload the video podcast if you have video onto your YouTube channel. But definitely use Anchor. It saved me so much time. It makes our lives so much easier, and it's just an amazing free app that you can use to launch your podcast and get a bunch of views. Alright guys, so those are my 5 tips for making your workflow faster for editing podcasts. Please let me know if any of these tips actually helped you, and write down in the comments what was your favorite tip and which one are you going to implement. Maybe it's one that you didn't know. You can also leave that. And also in the comments you can leave what questions you want me to answer next, and I will do my best to make a video and I will answer it. Alright guys, thank you again for watching. Again, this is Super Manny signing out, and remember, each and every one of you are super creators. You just have to find your superpower, and I will snap at you in the next video.